The morning was cold and quiet in the small town of Crestwood. The kind of morning where people walk with their coffee cups wrapped in scarves and hurry to work without saying much. Everything felt calm until the sound of police sirens broke through the air. The noise echoed down Main Street, and within seconds, everyone turned their heads to see what was happening. Outside a little coffee shop called the Morning Bean, a man stood still, holding a brown paper bag with 2 muffins and a steaming cup of coffee. His name was Daniel Carter, a man known by most locals as gentle, polite, and always ready to help anyone who needed it. He was the kind of person who smiled even at strangers, the kind who offered his seat to old people on the bus. But this morning, his life was about to change in a way he never imagined. 2 police cars stopped sharply in front of him. Doors slammed open, and 4 officers stepped out. Their faces were serious, and their eyes were fixed on Daniel. Confused, Daniel slowly placed the coffee cup on the bench beside him. "Sir, put your hands where I can see them," one of the officers shouted. Daniel blinked, surprised. "I'm sorry? Is something wrong?" "Hands up," the officer repeated, louder this time. The crowd started forming instantly. Workers, students, and even the barista from the cafe peeked outside. A few people already had their phones out, recording everything. Daniel hesitated but raised his hands slowly, still unsure what was happening. "I haven't done anything," he said softly, his voice calm but trembling. One officer stepped forward, grabbed Daniel by the arm, and turned him around. Cold metal clicked around his wrists, handcuffs. The crowd gasped. Someone whispered, "What did he do?" Another voice replied, "I think he robbed that store last night." Daniel looked around helplessly. "Robbed? What are you talking about?" he said, his words almost swallowed by the noise of the crowd. The officer searched him roughly, checking his jacket and pockets. "You're under arrest for suspicion of robbery," he said sternly. Daniel froze. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. "Robbery? You've got the wrong person," he said. "I didn't do anything wrong." But no one listened. The officers pulled him toward the police car as cameras flashed and people whispered. "Unbelievable," someone muttered. "He looks so normal." Daniel didn't resist. He didn't fight. He just looked down and whispered to himself, "You're making a mistake." The words were quiet, but one of the nearby bystanders caught them on camera. That short clip would later go viral online, a man in handcuffs, calmly saying he was innocent, while everyone around him believed the worst. As the police car door shut, Daniel caught a reflection of himself in the window, his tired eyes, his plain gray jacket, and the confusion written all over his face. He wondered how a peaceful morning had turned into a nightmare. The car drove away, and silence fell on Main Street. Only the sound of the police siren fading in the distance remained. Inside the car, Daniel tried to speak. "Officer, please, at least tell me what this is about. I think there's a misunderstanding." The officer in the front seat didn't turn around. "We'll talk at the station. Just sit tight." Daniel sighed, resting his head against the cold glass. Outside, the streets blurred past him, the bakery, the church, the playground where he used to volunteer every weekend. He closed his eyes, replaying the morning in his head. He had done nothing unusual. He bought breakfast for Mrs. Green, the old lady who lived next door. He even smiled at the cafe owner. Everything was normal, until now. At the police station, Daniel was escorted through the hallway like a criminal. People stared. Some officers whispered to each other, checking their phones. The news was already spreading online. Suspect arrested in connection with convenience store robbery. A young officer looked at Daniel with curiosity. "He doesn't look like a thief," he whispered. "Looks can be deceiving," another replied coldly. They placed Daniel in a small interrogation room. The walls were gray, the air heavy. On the table lay a folder, a tape recorder, and a cup of water. A detective entered, tall, late 40s, serious eyes. His name tag read Detective Miller. He sat down opposite Daniel, flipping through the folder. Daniel Carter, age 32. Works part-time at a repair shop. No criminal record. Lives alone. He looked up. You match the description of a man seen running from a robbery last night. Daniel frowned. That can't be right. I wasn't anywhere near that place. Miller crossed his arms. Where were you, then? Daniel took a deep breath. At the homeless shelter on River Street. I help out there every Thursday night. I was serving food. Miller raised an eyebrow. Do you have anyone who can confirm that? Daniel hesitated. The shelter was small, run by volunteers. Most people who came for help didn't want to be filmed or identified. No, he said quietly. But I was there. You can ask around. Miller leaned back in his chair, studying Daniel. There was something strange about his calmness. Most suspects begged, shouted, or cried. But Daniel just sat there, almost peaceful, even in handcuffs. After a moment, Miller said, a witness identified you. He said the man who ran from the store wore a gray jacket just like yours. Daniel looked down at his jacket. It was plain, worn, and had a small tear near the pocket. This jacket, he said softly. It's not new. I've had it for years. Miller didn't respond. He stood and left the room, leaving Daniel alone with his thoughts. Minutes passed. The silence in the room felt endless. Daniel looked at the clock. Each second sounded louder than the last. He thought about his mother, how she used to say, truth always finds a way to be seen. He wondered if she was right. Outside the room, Detective Miller was talking with another officer. The witness is sure it's him, the officer said. Same height, same jacket. But his behavior doesn't fit, Miller muttered. He doesn't act guilty. Maybe he's just good at pretending, the officer replied. Miller sighed. He had seen hundreds of suspects before. Some cried to look innocent. Some stayed silent. But there was something about Daniel's eyes, not fear, not defiance, just sadness. Meanwhile, Daniel sat quietly, replaying every moment of the last 24 hours. He remembered the laughter at the shelter, the stories the veterans told, the feeling of doing something good. How could that same night turn into this? The door opened again, and Miller entered with a small plastic bag. Inside was Daniel's wallet, phone, and keys. We're checking your prints, he said. Until then, you'll have to wait. Daniel nodded. Detective, please. I know you're just doing your job, but I'm telling you the truth. I didn't do this. Miller looked at him for a long moment. If you're innocent, the evidence will prove it. Daniel smiled sadly. Sometimes, the truth doesn't come fast enough. Outside the room, the rain began to fall, light at first, then heavier, tapping against the window like a slow rhythm. The camera in the corner blinked red, recording every second. Hours passed. Daniel sat alone, his hands still cuffed. He could hear voices outside, laughter, footsteps, doors closing. But no one came for him. The coffee he had bought that morning was probably still sitting on the bench outside the cafe, growing cold in the wind. Then, suddenly, the door opened again. A different officer entered with a laptop. He placed it on the table and clicked a button. A blurry video played, security footage from a nearby store. A man in a gray jacket was seen running away from the crime scene. His face wasn't clear, but the body build looked similar to Daniel's. Miller pointed at the screen. That's you, isn't it? Daniel leaned forward, staring closely. His heart began to race. The person in the video, same jacket, same hair, same height, but something felt off. He whispered, "That's not me." Then who is it? Miller asked. Daniel didn't answer. His eyes stayed fixed on the screen, and for the first time, a flicker of pain crossed his face. The video ended, leaving only silence. Daniel slowly lifted his eyes and looked at the detective. That jacket, it's mine. But that's not me wearing it. Miller frowned. What are you saying? Daniel hesitated. His voice dropped to a whisper. It's my brother's. I think I know what's going on. Miller's eyes narrowed. Your brother? Daniel nodded, his voice trembling. His name is Ethan. We haven't spoken in years. The room went quiet. The rain outside grew louder, and the light flickered above them. Miller stared at Daniel, trying to read his face. Why didn't you mention this before? Daniel looked down, his eyes glassy. Because I didn't want to believe it could be true. And with that one sentence, the story took a turn no one expected. The con man everyone thought was guilty had just opened the door to a truth far deeper and far more heartbreaking than anyone could have imagined. Detective Miller stood still for a moment, his eyes locked on Daniel. The rain outside was falling harder now, washing the streets clean but leaving a heavier silence in the small interrogation room. He could hear the soft hum of the air conditioner, the flicker of the fluorescent light above, and Daniel's steady but slow breathing. Your brother, Miller repeated, his tone low but firm. Tell me about him. Daniel looked up, his eyes tired but calm. Ethan, he said quietly. He's my younger brother. We grew up together in the same house, same small town. He used to be full of life, you know? Always laughing, always dreaming big. But things changed after our father passed away. Miller pulled out his notepad and started writing, his expression unreadable. Daniel continued, his voice soft. Ethan couldn't handle it. He started hanging out with the wrong people. Drinking, staying out all night, then, Daniel paused. Then came the drugs. He exhaled deeply, his eyes fixed on the metal table between them. I tried to help him, detective. I tried everything. Rehab, therapy, even took him into my home when he had nowhere to go. But he always ran away. The last time I saw him was almost a year ago. Miller leaned back slightly, his arms crossed. So you think he could be the one in that video? Daniel hesitated. I don't want to accuse him. But the man in that video was wearing this jacket. It was his once. I kept it after he left, hoping he'd come back someday. I never thought, his voice trailed off. The detective studied him for a long moment. Something in Daniel's tone, the way his voice cracked slightly, didn't sound rehearsed or defensive. It sounded real. Still, Miller couldn't just rely on emotion. He needed proof. We'll look into it, he said finally. Do you have any recent contact information for him? Daniel shook his head. No. But he used to stay near the old train yard, with some friends. If he's still around, someone there might know. Miller nodded slowly. All right. He stood up and opened the door. Wait here. I'll be back. When the door closed, Daniel exhaled shakily. For the first time, he felt a faint spark of hope, maybe now they'd start looking for the real person responsible. But deep inside, he also felt a painful fear for Ethan, for what might happen when the truth finally came out. Outside the room, Miller walked down the hallway toward the main office. I want someone to run a background check on an Ethan Carter, he ordered. Relation to our suspect. See if he has any priors or connections to last night's robbery. One of the officers nodded and started typing. Within minutes, a file popped up. Detective, the officer said quietly, you might want to see this. Miller leaned over the screen. Ethan Carter, multiple arrests for theft, minor assault, and drug possession. Last known address, abandoned building near the old train yard. Miller's jaw tightened. Get a unit down there. Now. As the officers prepared to leave, he looked back toward the interrogation room. Could it really be the brother? He thought. He had seen guilty men pretend to cry before. But there was something different about Daniel. His sadness wasn't about himself, it was about someone else. Back in the room, Daniel sat quietly. He could hear muffled voices outside, the shuffle of boots, the radio crackling. He didn't know what was happening, but he prayed it was leading to the truth. He thought back to the day his brother left home. Ethan had been angry, frustrated, blaming Daniel for everything, their father's death, the bills, even his own failures. Daniel remembered the last words Ethan said before storming out the door. "You think you're better than me, huh? You'll see one day." That was 3 years ago. Since then, Daniel had never stopped hoping he'd come back. He wrote letters he never sent. He kept a photo of them as kids on his fridge, both smiling, both holding toy airplanes. He whispered softly to himself, "Where are you, Ethan?" Meanwhile, across town, 2 patrol cars drove toward the old train yard. The place was half abandoned, with broken streetlights and graffiti on every wall. It was the kind of place where forgotten people disappeared. The officers stepped out, flashlights cutting through the dark rain. They found a small fire burning inside a rusty barrel. Around it sat 2 homeless men, shivering under blankets. One of them looked up nervously. "We don't want no trouble, officer." "We're looking for someone," one cop said. "Ethan Carter." "You know him?" The older man nodded slowly. "Yeah. Ethan's been around. But he's not here now. Haven't seen him since last night." The cop frowned. "You know where he went?" The man hesitated. "He said he needed money, something about a job. But he looked scared." The officers exchanged glances. It wasn't much, but it was something. Back at the station, Detective Miller returned to Daniel. "We're checking into your brother," he said. "But until we confirm anything, you'll remain here." Daniel nodded quietly. He wasn't angry. He understood they were doing their job. But inside, he was breaking, not because of the handcuffs, but because he feared what they might find. Hours passed again. The station grew quieter as the night deepened. Rainwater ran down the windows in silver lines. Daniel's eyes grew heavy, but he didn't sleep. He thought about Ethan, where he might be, what he might be doing. Then, suddenly, the door opened. Detective Miller entered, his expression more serious than before. "We found something," he said. He laid a few printed photos on the table. Security stills. One showed the robber running out of the store. Another showed him dropping a small object near a trash bin, a bracelet. Miller pushed the image closer. "Does this mean anything to you?" Daniel's breath caught. He recognized it instantly, a leather bracelet with a tiny silver plain charm. It was the same bracelet Daniel had given Ethan years ago, back when they were still close. He nodded slowly, his throat tightening. "That's his." "My brother's." Miller's voice softened slightly. "So you're saying your brother committed the robbery?" Daniel shook his head quickly. "I don't know what he did. But if that's really him, he's not dangerous. He's just lost." For a moment, the detective just stared at him. "You're defending him, even now?" Daniel met his eyes. "He's still my brother." Silence filled the room again. The only sound was the soft ticking of the clock. Finally, Miller stood up. "We're issuing a search alert for Ethan Carter. You'll be notified when we find him. Until then, you'll stay here. For your own protection." Daniel nodded. He didn't argue. He just lowered his head and whispered, "Please, don't hurt him." Later that night, when the station lights dimmed and most officers went home, Miller sat at his desk, staring at the report. He thought about Daniel's words, "He's not dangerous. He's just lost." Something about that sentence echoed in his mind. He pulled up Daniel's background again. No record. No violence. No lies. He had even received an award years ago for community service at the shelter. This was not a man who belonged behind bars. Miller rubbed his temples and sighed. "If he's telling the truth, we owe him an apology," he murmured. Meanwhile, Daniel sat in the holding cell, quietly watching the rain outside. He could hear faint thunder in the distance. Every drop that hit the window felt like time slipping away. He thought of Ethan, the boy who once dreamed of becoming a pilot, who used to make paper planes and toss them out the window, shouting, "One day, I'll fly for real." Daniel smiled faintly through his tears. "You were supposed to fly high, Ethan," he whispered. "Not fall this far." Just then, the cell door opened again. An officer stepped in. "Carter," he said. "You've got someone asking for you." Daniel stood up, surprised. "Who?" The officer shrugged. "Some woman. Says she's from the shelter." Moments later, a woman in her 50s entered, warm eyes, rain-soaked coat, holding a small folder. "Daniel," she exclaimed. "I just heard what happened." It was Martha, the manager of the homeless shelter. Daniel's eyes filled with relief. "Martha, you came." She nodded quickly. "Of course. I told the police you were with us last night. You served dinner to everyone, remember?" Detective Miller entered behind her, listening quietly. Martha continued, "You stayed until almost midnight. Everyone there saw you. There's no way you could have been at that robbery." Miller glanced at Daniel, realization dawning on his face. "So he has an alibi." Martha nodded firmly. "A strong one. You've arrested the wrong man." The detective stood still, processing the words. Everything suddenly made sense, the calmness, the kindness, the sadness in Daniel's eyes. Daniel didn't smile. He only said softly, "Please, detective. Find my brother before he gets lost forever." Miller looked at him, and for the first time since that morning, he felt something shift inside. This wasn't just a case anymore. It was a story of two brothers, one lost in darkness and the other still holding a candle for him. Outside, the storm began to fade. But inside the hearts of everyone in that station, a different kind of storm was only just beginning. Detective Miller stood by the window long after Martha had left. The rain had stopped, leaving the town covered in a thin mist that shimmered under the streetlights. Inside the station, silence hung heavy. The file on Daniel Carter lay open on the desk, a clean record, a quiet life, a man who spent his evenings helping strangers. Every piece of evidence pointed to one truth now: Daniel wasn't the man they were looking for. But somewhere out there, his brother Ethan was lost, desperate, and running out of time. Miller rubbed his chin thoughtfully, then called out to one of his officers. "Get me the unit from the train yard search. Tell them to expand the area. We're looking for Ethan Carter, mid-30s, light brown hair, gray jacket. He's wanted for questioning." The officer nodded and rushed off. Miller looked back at Daniel, who sat silently in the cell, his hands clasped together, eyes closed as if praying. The detective hesitated, then walked over. "Daniel," he said, unlocking the door. "You're free to go." Daniel lifted his head slowly, surprise flickering in his tired eyes. "You mean I can leave?" Miller nodded. "The shelter manager confirmed your alibi. You weren't near the robbery scene. I'm sorry for what you went through." Daniel stood up, his legs a little shaky. He didn't speak for a moment. Then he said quietly, "Thank you, detective." But please, promise me one thing, find my brother before something bad happens. Miller studied him for a moment and nodded. We'll do everything we can. Daniel nodded gratefully and walked out into the cold night air. The sky was dark, the streets empty except for the distant hum of traffic. He took a deep breath, feeling the freedom on his skin, but it didn't feel like relief. It felt like guilt. Guilt that he was free while Ethan was out there, possibly scared, possibly in danger. As Daniel walked home, he passed by the same cafe where everything had started that morning. The coffee cup he'd dropped was gone, washed away by the rain, but the memory of the arrest still hung in the air. A few people glanced at him as he walked by, their faces showing recognition. He didn't care. He just wanted to go home and think. Inside his small apartment, everything looked exactly the same, neat, simple, quiet. A photo of him and Ethan sat on the shelf. Daniel picked it up, staring at their younger faces. "Where did you go, Ethan?" he whispered. "Why couldn't you just ask for help?" He sat by the window, watching the raindrops slide down the glass. Sleep never came that night. Meanwhile, miles away, the police cruisers moved slowly through the industrial part of town. Flashlights cut through the darkness, dogs barked, radios crackled. The officers called out Ethan's name, but no answer came. The old train yard was silent except for the dripping of water from rusted pipes. Detective Miller joined the search, his coat pulled tight against the wind. He felt something about this case, something more than just duty. He couldn't explain why, but Daniel's quiet strength had gotten under his skin. He wanted to find Ethan, not just for justice, but for Daniel. "Check the warehouses," Miller ordered. "He might be hiding from the cold." They moved through the shadows, checking every corner. In one of the abandoned buildings, a small movement caught an officer's eye, a flicker of light behind a stack of crates. "Over here," he called. The officers moved carefully, their flashlights steady. Behind the crate sat a man, thin, pale, shaking from the cold. His hands were dirty, his eyes hollow, but when he saw the lights, he didn't run. He just raised his hands slowly. "Don't shoot," he said weakly. "I'm not armed." The light revealed his face. It was Ethan Carter. Miller stepped forward carefully. "Ethan Carter?" The man nodded faintly. "You know why we're here?" Ethan lowered his head. "Yeah," he whispered. "The store. The robbery. I didn't mean for it to go that way." Miller motioned for the officers to stand down. "Tell me what happened," he said. Ethan swallowed hard. "I just wanted some money. I was desperate. I thought I could grab a few bills and run. But when the clerk shouted, I panicked. I never wanted to hurt anyone. Then I saw the camera, and I ran. I didn't think anyone would recognize me." His voice cracked as he looked up. "But he did, didn't he? My brother." Miller looked at him closely. "He didn't turn you in, Ethan. He defended you. Even when we thought he was guilty, he still protected you." Ethan blinked, confused. What?" "He said you needed help, not punishment," Miller said quietly. "He was arrested because of you, but he never said a bad word about you." For a long moment, Ethan didn't speak. His eyes filled with tears, and he dropped his face into his hands. "He should hate me," he said softly. "After everything I did, he should hate me." Miller sighed. "He doesn't. He still believes there's good in you." Ethan's shoulders trembled. "I never wanted this life," he said. "I wanted to make him proud. But after Dad died, everything fell apart. Daniel was always the strong one. I was the weak one. I thought stealing would fix things, just for a day, maybe buy me a meal, maybe a bus ticket out of this place. But I only made it worse." Miller motioned for the paramedics waiting outside. We'll take you in, he said gently. But first, you need to get warm. Ethan nodded weakly. As they helped him up, he looked at Miller. Will I see him? Daniel? Miller asked. Yeah. You'll see him. Back at the station, Daniel was still awake when the call came. The detective's voice was calm on the other end. We found him, Miller said. Daniel closed his eyes, relief flooding through him. Is he okay? He's cold, tired, but alive. He confessed to the robbery. Daniel didn't say anything for a moment. Then he said softly, "Thank you, detective." When Ethan was brought to the station, Daniel was waiting. The two brothers looked at each other for the first time in years. Ethan's eyes were red, his face thin, his hair messy. He looked older, broken. Daniel took a step forward, unsure what to say. "Ethan," he began. Ethan couldn't meet his eyes. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "For everything. You shouldn't even be here. You should hate me." Daniel shook his head slowly. "I don't hate you. I just missed you." Ethan finally looked up, tears streaming down his face. "They said you were arrested because of me. Why didn't you tell them?" Daniel smiled faintly. "Because I didn't want to lose you again. I thought maybe if they found you first, you'd still have a chance." Ethan let out a shaky breath. "A chance for what?" "To come back," Daniel said simply. Detective Miller watched from a distance, quietly moved. The reunion was silent, raw, and real, two brothers on opposite sides of a mistake, finding their way back through forgiveness. After a while, Ethan whispered, "They'll take me away, won't they?" Daniel nodded softly. "Yes. But I'll visit you. Every week. I promise." Ethan smiled weakly, as if he didn't deserve it. "You're too good for me." Daniel shook his head. "No, Ethan. I just never stopped believing you could be better." The officers led Ethan away gently, and Daniel watched him go, his heart heavy but full of something he hadn't felt in years, peace. Later that night, Miller approached Daniel. "You could press charges, you know. You were wrongly accused." Daniel smiled sadly. "No, detective. What's the point? He's already paying for what he's done. I just want him to get help." Miller nodded, understanding. "You're a good man, Daniel." Daniel looked out the window, watching the dawn break. "No," he said softly. "Just a man who still believes people can change." As the first light touched the streets of Crestwood, the storm had finally passed. Somewhere in a quiet jail cell, Ethan sat alone, holding a small photo of two boys with paper airplanes, a reminder of who he used to be. And somewhere outside, his brother Daniel walked home, tired but at peace, knowing that sometimes forgiveness can heal wounds that justice never could. The town moved on, the people forgot, but one truth remained: not every man in handcuffs is guilty, and not every broken soul is beyond saving. The next morning, sunlight crept through the blinds of Daniel's small apartment. It was the first quiet morning he'd had in days. The world outside was moving on, cars passing, people heading to work, unaware of the story that had unfolded in the heart of their town. Daniel sat by the window with a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. His hands still trembled slightly, not from fear but from everything that had built up inside him. Sleep had been impossible. His mind replayed the night before, the moment Ethan had looked at him through tears, the weight of those words, "You're too good for me." When the knock came on the door, Daniel almost didn't move. He opened it to find Detective Miller standing there, holding a small brown envelope. "Morning," the detective said quietly. "May I come in?" Daniel nodded and stepped aside. Miller looked around the humble apartment, books stacked neatly, a small photo on the shelf, a single chair by the window. "You live simple," Miller said, half to himself. "Always have," Daniel replied softly. Miller handed him the envelope. It's the report. The case is officially closed. You're cleared of all charges. But you might want to stay low for a while. Daniel frowned. Stay low? Why? Miller sighed. The media got hold of your story. Some outlets are saying we arrested the wrong man. Others are asking why you didn't press charges. They don't understand why you'd forgive someone who put you in jail. Daniel looked down at the envelope, then back up. They don't need to understand. I know why. The detective studied him for a moment, then said, You remind me of my brother. He passed years ago. We fought before it happened. I never got to make it right. Maybe that's why this case hit me so hard. Daniel gave a faint, understanding smile. Sometimes life gives us second chances, he said. Sometimes it gives them to other people, through us. Miller nodded, then turned to leave. You ever need anything, Daniel, you call me. As the door closed behind him, Daniel stood there for a long time, the city noise distant, almost unreal. Later that day, he decided to visit the police station, not because he had to, but because he wanted to see Ethan. The officers hesitated at first, but when Miller gave a nod, they let him through. The jail area was quiet, rows of cells lined with faces that had seen better days. Ethan sat on the narrow bench, staring at the floor. When he looked up and saw Daniel, his expression was one of disbelief. You came back, he said, his voice rough. Daniel nodded. I told you I would. Ethan smiled faintly. You shouldn't waste your time on me. I'm not worth it. Daniel stepped closer, gripping the bars lightly. You're my brother. That's worth everything. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Ethan said quietly, They told me I'll get a hearing in 2 weeks. Maybe more time if they find out I confessed early. Daniel nodded. That's something. Maybe the judge will see you're trying to make things right. Ethan looked away. Do you really believe that? I have to, Daniel said softly. If I don't, then what's the point of believing anything at all? Outside, the world continued to talk about them. The local news ran headlines like Innocent Man Forgives Brother Who Framed Him and Wrongful Arrest Sparks Debate on Justice. Some people praised Daniel as a symbol of forgiveness, others called him naive. But Daniel never replied to any reporters. He kept working at the shelter, quietly helping where he could. The people there respected his silence, they could see the pain in his eyes, but they also saw the strength behind it. One evening, after serving dinner at the shelter, Daniel found a young man sitting alone in the corner. He was about 20, shivering, his clothes torn. You okay? Daniel asked gently. The boy looked up, startled. Yeah, just cold. Daniel handed him a cup of soup and sat down. You don't have to talk if you don't want to, he said. The boy hesitated, then whispered, I stole something. Just food. They're looking for me. Daniel looked at him for a moment, then said quietly, You can't run forever. But you can start over. The boy frowned. You think they'd let me? Daniel smiled softly. I think if you show them you're sorry, there's always a chance. That night, as Daniel walked home through the cool air, he realized something, his pain had become his purpose. What he went through wasn't just an accident. Maybe it was meant to teach him what forgiveness truly meant, not just for Ethan, but for anyone who had lost their way. At the same time, in the small jail cell, Ethan lay awake. The guilt inside him was heavier than the metal bars. He replayed his brother's words over and over. You're my brother. That's worth everything. He couldn't understand it, not fully. But for the first time in years, he wanted to try to be worthy of it. He started helping around the jail, cleaning, reading books from the small library. The guards noticed. One even told Detective Miller, that Carter guy, he's different. Not like the others. Miller just nodded. Maybe he's finally learning what his brother's been trying to teach him all along. Weeks passed. Daniel visited Ethan often. They didn't talk much about the past anymore. They talked about the future, about what Ethan would do when he got out, about maybe working together at the shelter. There were no promises, just small hopes, but that was enough. Then one afternoon, Daniel received a letter from the court. Ethan's hearing date was set. He read it slowly, then folded it carefully. When the day came, he sat in the courtroom's back row, hands clasped, heart pounding. Ethan was brought in wearing the standard prison uniform, but he stood straighter than before. When the judge asked if he had anything to say, Ethan said, "I made mistakes. I hurt people I care about. But someone I wronged still believed in me. I can't change what I did, but I want to change who I am." The courtroom was silent. The judge studied him for a long moment, then said, "I believe you mean that, Mr. Carter. Your sentence will be reduced, and you'll be eligible for early release under supervision." Ethan's eyes widened. He looked at Daniel, who nodded with quiet pride. Outside the courthouse, the two brothers stood together for a long moment. "You did it," Daniel said softly. Ethan shook his head. "No. We did." Daniel smiled. "Then let's keep doing it." That evening, as they walked under the orange glow of the sunset, neither spoke for a while. They didn't need to. The silence between them was no longer heavy, it was peaceful. Somewhere behind them, a world full of noise and judgment kept spinning. But in that small space of forgiveness, two brothers had found something stronger than justice, stronger than pain, hope. Ethan Carter walked out of the courthouse into the cool afternoon air, a free man at last, though freedom felt heavier than he imagined. The sunlight hurt his eyes after months of dim jail light. Beside him, Daniel walked quietly, his calm presence like a steady anchor in a storm. Neither spoke for a while, there were no words big enough for what they felt. Ethan looked around at the people passing by, the cars, the children laughing in the distance. It all felt strange, like a world he no longer belonged to. "I don't know where to start," he said finally, his voice almost a whisper. Daniel smiled gently. "You start where everyone starts," he said. "From today." They stopped by a small diner for lunch. The waitress recognized Daniel from the news. Her smile faded when she noticed Ethan. The story had made its rounds, the innocent man who forgave his criminal brother. Some saw it as an act of grace, others saw it as foolishness. When the waitress brought their food, she avoided looking at Ethan. He noticed. He always noticed. "Guess forgiveness doesn't buy coffee," he muttered. Daniel didn't react. "Give it time," he said softly. "People will see you for who you're becoming, not who you were." Ethan pushed his food around the plate. "And if they don't?" Daniel looked out the window. "Then we'll keep walking anyway." Over the next few weeks, Ethan stayed with Daniel. The apartment was small but warm. Every morning Daniel went to work at the shelter, and Ethan tagged along, sweeping floors, washing dishes, doing anything that needed doing. The others there were cautious at first. They'd seen his face on TV, and whispers followed him through the halls. But Daniel's quiet trust slowly changed things. When volunteers saw Ethan working without complaint, helping the elderly, listening patiently to others' problems, they began to greet him with real smiles. For the first time in years, Ethan felt something he'd almost forgotten: belonging. One evening, after everyone had gone home, Daniel and Ethan stayed behind to fix a leaky sink. The sound of dripping water echoed softly through the empty hall. "You know," Daniel said, "Dad used to hate leaky faucets. Remember how he'd always say, 'It's not the big cracks that destroy a home, it's the little ones you ignore?'" Ethan smiled faintly. "Yeah. He used to make us fix everything twice just to be sure." Daniel chuckled. "He'd be proud of you, Ethan. You're trying. That's what matters." Ethan looked at him seriously. You really think that? After everything I did? Daniel's expression softened. I don't think it, Ethan. I know it. But the world outside wasn't as forgiving. One morning, as Ethan was carrying boxes into the shelter, a police car stopped outside. Two officers stepped out, not Detective Miller this time, but younger men who didn't know their story. You there, one called out. We've had reports of theft from the nearby store. You match the description. Ethan froze. Daniel came running out. Officers, wait. He works here. He didn't do anything. The officers looked skeptical. We just need to ask a few questions. Ethan felt his chest tighten, memories flashing back, handcuffs, cold cells, judgmental eyes. His voice cracked. I didn't steal anything. Daniel stepped between them. Check the cameras at the store, he said firmly. You'll see it wasn't him. After a tense few minutes, a call came through on the officer's radio. The suspect had already been caught, someone else entirely. The officers muttered an apology and left. But the damage was done. Ethan stood there shaking, his eyes full of fear and shame. It's never going to end, is it? He said. No matter what I do, I'll always be that guy. Daniel placed a hand on his shoulder. You can't change how people see you, he said gently. You can only change what you do next. Ethan looked down. And what if I'm not strong enough? Daniel smiled sadly. Then I'll be strong for both of us. That night, Ethan sat alone on the balcony, staring at the city lights. He could hear Daniel moving around inside, humming softly as he cleaned up. Ethan's mind was a storm. He wanted to be better, to prove everyone wrong, but the shadow of his past followed him everywhere. Just then, his phone buzzed, a message from someone he hadn't expected. It was from a man named Travis, an old friend from his darker days. Heard you're out. Need some quick cash? One job. No risk. Ethan stared at the message for a long time, his hands trembling. The temptation was like a whisper in his ear, easy money, fast relief, a way to feel control again. But then he remembered Daniel's words, start from today. He deleted the message and turned off the phone. For the first time, he chose differently. The next morning, Daniel noticed the change in his brother. There was still tiredness in his eyes, but something steadier too. Over breakfast, Ethan said, I almost made a mistake last night. Daniel looked at him carefully but didn't ask. But I didn't, Ethan added. I thought of what you'd say. Daniel smiled. Then you did the right thing. Ethan exhaled slowly, a small weight lifting from his chest. It's strange, he said. Every time I want to give up, your voice pulls me back. Daniel reached for his coffee. That's what brothers do. They remind each other who they are. Days turned into weeks. The shelter began a new project, a mobile kitchen for the homeless. Daniel was leading it, and Ethan offered to help. One afternoon, as they served meals downtown, a familiar voice spoke from behind. Didn't expect to see you two here. It was Detective Miller. He smiled, hands in his pockets. Looks like you've built something good, Daniel. And you, he said, turning to Ethan, I've been hearing things. Good things. Ethan looked down modestly. Just trying to stay out of trouble. Miller grinned. Well, keep doing that. The city could use more men like you. After Miller left, Ethan turned to Daniel. You think he really meant that? Daniel nodded. He doesn't say things he doesn't mean. Ethan smiled for the first time in days. But peace never lasts long in this world. That evening, when Daniel went out to buy groceries, someone followed him. A man in a dark jacket, face shadowed by the streetlights. Daniel didn't notice at first. He walked into a small store, grabbed a few things, and stepped out, only to find himself face to face with the same man. "You Daniel Carter?" the man asked. Daniel hesitated. "Yes." "Why?" The man smirked. "You don't know me, but your brother owes me. Big time. He disappeared before paying his debts. I think you can help with that." Daniel's heart sank. "I don't know what you're talking about." The man leaned closer. "Oh, I think you do. Tell Ethan I'll be coming for what's mine. And if he doesn't pay up, maybe I'll collect in other ways." Then he walked off, leaving Daniel standing frozen under the dim streetlight. When Daniel returned home, Ethan was waiting. One look at Daniel's face told him something was wrong. "What happened?" he asked. Daniel hesitated, then said quietly, "Someone came looking for you. Said you owe him." Ethan's face went pale. "That must be Travis. I thought he'd forget." Daniel's tone was calm, but his eyes were filled with concern. "He hasn't. And now it's not just your past following you, Ethan. It's ours." Ethan ran a hand through his hair. "I'll fix it. I promise. Just don't get involved." Daniel stepped closer. "We'll fix it. Together." Ethan looked at his brother for a long time, emotion flooding his face. "You'd really risk yourself for me again?" Daniel nodded slowly. "You're my brother. That hasn't changed." Ethan swallowed hard, guilt and gratitude twisting inside him. "Then I'll make this right, Daniel. Somehow." Outside, thunder rolled in the distance. The storm that had once torn their lives apart was coming again, only this time, it wasn't the law they had to face, but the ghosts of Ethan's past. And as rain began to fall softly against the window, both brothers silently understood one thing: forgiveness had given them a second chance, but keeping it would cost them everything. The rain had started to fall harder by midnight, tapping against the apartment windows like restless fingers. Daniel couldn't sleep. He sat on the couch, staring at the small photo of him and Ethan as children, two boys smiling in a sunlit backyard, their whole lives ahead of them. Now, those faces felt like strangers. He turned the picture over and saw his mother's handwriting on the back: "Stay together, no matter what." The words felt heavier now than ever. In the bedroom, Ethan tossed restlessly, his mind racing. Travis's name echoed in his thoughts like a curse. He hadn't seen that man in years, but he remembered him well, the kind of man who never forgot a debt. Ethan knew the truth: there was no job, no favor too small for Travis. Everything came with a price. He sat up, rubbing his face, the same sinking feeling crawling up his spine that he'd felt before his life fell apart years ago. He quietly stepped out into the living room. Daniel looked up from the couch. "Couldn't sleep either?" Ethan shook his head. "No. I've been thinking about Travis. If he's here, he won't stop until he gets what he wants." Daniel's voice was calm. "What does he want?" Ethan hesitated. "Money. I borrowed from him a long time ago. Before the robbery. I told myself I'd pay it back, but then I got caught and, well, you know the rest." Daniel leaned forward. "How much?" Ethan shrugged helplessly. "A few thousand. But it doesn't matter. It's not about the money anymore. He wants control." Daniel's brow furrowed. "So what do we do?" Ethan looked toward the window. "I'll talk to him. Alone." Daniel stood up immediately. "No. That's exactly what he wants. He wants you scared and alone." Ethan shook his head. "You don't understand, Daniel. Travis doesn't stop. If I don't face him, he'll come after you, or worse, someone at the shelter." Daniel stepped closer, lowering his voice. "We'll handle it together, Ethan. You don't have to carry this alone anymore. But deep down, Ethan wasn't sure. The idea of dragging Daniel into danger made him sick. That night, after Daniel finally drifted off to sleep, Ethan slipped on his jacket, wrote a short note on the kitchen table, and left quietly. The rain soaked through his clothes as he walked down the dimly lit street, his footsteps echoing off the wet pavement. The city seemed to whisper around him, every shadow reminding him of the life he tried so hard to leave behind. He reached an old parking lot behind a shuttered gas station, the place Travis had once used for his meetings. A black car waited there, engine idling. Travis stepped out, tall, broad, a cigarette glowing faintly between his fingers. "Didn't think you had the guts to show," he said with a smirk. Ethan swallowed hard. "I came to end this. Whatever I owe you, I'll pay. But you leave my brother out of it." Travis chuckled, flicking ash onto the ground. "Your brother, huh? The saint everyone's talking about? You think he's untouchable?" He took a step closer. "You think forgiveness makes you clean?" Ethan's fists clenched, but he stayed still. "I'm not that person anymore, Travis. I'm trying to make things right." Travis laughed, the sound sharp and cruel. "Make things right? You think a man like you gets to walk free and serve soup to strangers like nothing happened? The world doesn't work that way." He leaned in closer, his voice low and cold. "You owe me, Carter. And you'll pay one way or another. You got 24 hours. Before Ethan could reply, headlights appeared from the corner of the street, a familiar car. Daniel. He'd found the note. He stepped out, rain pouring over his coat, his expression unreadable. "Ethan," he called out. "What are you doing?" Travis turned, eyes narrowing. "You brought him here?" Ethan's heart dropped. "No, Daniel, you shouldn't be here." But Daniel kept walking, calm but determined. "If this is about a debt, I'll handle it," he said firmly. "You leave my brother out of this." Travis sneered. Brave words for a man who doesn't know what kind of trouble he's standing in. The air felt heavy, tense. The rain fell harder, drumming against the concrete. Daniel stood his ground. "You've hurt him enough. You want your money? Fine. I'll find a way. But you don't threaten him again." Ethan looked between them, panic rising. "Daniel, stop. Please." But Daniel didn't move. Travis stepped closer, his voice like ice. "You think you can fix him, preacher? He'll never change. Once a thief, always a thief." Something in Ethan snapped. "You're wrong," he said sharply, stepping between them. "You don't know me anymore. I've made mistakes, but I'm done being afraid of them." His voice trembled, but his eyes were steady. "You can take your threats, your money, whatever you want, but you don't get to own my life anymore." Travis stared at him for a moment, then smirked. "We'll see about that." He turned and walked back to his car, slamming the door before speeding off into the rain. The sound of tires faded into the distance, leaving only the pounding of rain and the heavy silence between the two brothers. Daniel finally exhaled. "That was dangerous, Ethan." Ethan nodded, drenched, shivering. "I know. But I couldn't let him hurt you." Daniel looked at him for a long moment, then placed a hand on his shoulder. "You did the right thing. Facing your past doesn't make you weak, Ethan. It makes you free." They walked home in silence, soaked to the bone, but somehow lighter. The fear that had shadowed Ethan for so long felt different now, still there, but smaller, weaker. For the first time, he had stood up to it. The next morning, the sun broke through the clouds. Daniel was making breakfast when there was a knock at the door. It was Detective Miller. "Morning," he said, stepping inside. "I heard about a disturbance near the gas station last night. You two know anything about it?" Ethan and Daniel exchanged a quick look. Nothing illegal happened, Daniel said calmly. Just unfinished business. Miller studied their faces, then nodded slowly. I see. Well, just be careful. Not everyone likes to see a man change. After Miller left, Ethan sat quietly, stirring his coffee. You think Travis will come back? Daniel thought for a moment. Maybe. But this time, he'll find two of us waiting. Ethan smiled faintly. You really believe in me, don't you? Daniel nodded. I always have. Later that day, Ethan returned to the shelter. The volunteers greeted him warmly. He smiled, but his thoughts were distant. He knew Travis might not be done yet. But instead of running, he picked up a box of canned food and began unloading it, focusing on each small act of good he could do. Because for the first time, Ethan wasn't just trying to be forgiven, he was trying to deserve it. That night, as the city settled under a calm, silver moon, Ethan looked out from the balcony, feeling something he hadn't felt in years: strength. The kind that doesn't come from being fearless, but from facing fear and standing anyway. Inside, Daniel turned off the lights, glancing toward his brother with quiet pride. He knew the story wasn't over. But whatever came next, they would face it together. Somewhere out there, Travis drove through the darkness, anger simmering in his chest. He wasn't finished yet. And as the city lights disappeared behind him, his mind formed a plan that would test everything Ethan and Daniel had built. The storm wasn't over. It was only changing shape. The night was still when the sound of a car engine broke the silence. Outside Daniel's apartment, a black sedan crept along the curb and stopped a few houses away. Inside the car, Travis sat with a cigarette burning low between his fingers, his eyes cold and calculating. The city lights reflected off the windshield, casting thin lines across his face. He had been watching the Carter brothers for days, waiting for the right moment. You think you can walk away from me, Ethan Carter? He muttered under his breath. Nobody walks away. Inside, Ethan was sitting by the window, half lost in thought, when he noticed the car parked down the street. His stomach tightened. Something felt wrong. Daniel, he called quietly. Daniel came out of the kitchen. What is it? Ethan pointed toward the window. That car, it's been there for a while. Daniel squinted through the glass. You think it's him? Ethan nodded. I know it's him. Daniel placed a calming hand on his brother's shoulder. Don't panic. We'll call Miller. But Ethan shook his head quickly. No. If the police come, Travis will disappear again. He'll wait and come back later. I need to end this, tonight. Daniel frowned. Ethan, no. You don't have to face him alone again. Ethan met his eyes. I'm not the same man I was before, Daniel. This time, I'm doing it right. Before Daniel could stop him, Ethan grabbed his jacket and stepped out into the night. The air was cold, sharp with the smell of rain and asphalt. As he approached the car, Travis stepped out, smiling like a predator. Well, look who's brave now, he sneered. Didn't learn the first time, huh? Ethan kept his distance. You need to leave us alone, Travis. Whatever I owed you, it's over. Travis chuckled darkly. Over? You think debts disappear because you found God or forgiveness or whatever nonsense your brother's selling? He stepped closer, his eyes glinting. You embarrassed me, Ethan. You made me look weak. I don't let that go. Ethan swallowed hard. You can threaten me all you want. But you leave my brother out of this. Travis's grin widened. That's the thing. I was thinking maybe I don't need you to pay anymore. Maybe he can. He's got a job, a clean name. I'm sure he'd do anything to keep you safe. Ethan's face hardened. If you go near him, I swear, Travis interrupted, mocking, you'll what? Call the cops? You think they'll listen to you, ex-con? Before Ethan could respond, Daniel's voice came from behind. They'll listen to me. Travis turned, surprised. Daniel stood a few feet away, calm but unafraid. You shouldn't be here, Ethan said through clenched teeth. Daniel ignored him. You came for money, right, Travis? Fine. I'll give it to you. Just walk away and never come near my brother again. Travis laughed. You think it's that simple? You think I want your pity money? No, preacher. I want respect. I want him to remember who he really is. He pulled something from his coat, a small pistol, cold and black against the rain-soaked light. Ethan froze, his heart slamming against his ribs. Travis, don't do this, he said quietly. Travis pointed the gun at Daniel. Maybe a little fear will remind you both how the world really works. Time slowed. Daniel raised his hands slowly, his voice calm even in the face of danger. You don't have to do this. You can still walk away. Travis's jaw tightened. Shut up. His finger twitched on the trigger. Ethan's breath caught. Without thinking, he lunged forward, shouting, no. The gun went off. The sound echoed through the street, splitting the night in half. Birds scattered from nearby trees, and the world fell silent again. For a second, nobody moved. Then Daniel stumbled back, clutching his side. Ethan caught him before he hit the ground. Daniel! No, no, stay with me, he cried, his hands already red with blood. Daniel's face was pale but calm. Ethan, he whispered weakly, it's okay. Travis stared, eyes wide, his hand shaking. I didn't mean, before he could finish, police sirens wailed in the distance. A neighbor must have called. Travis dropped the gun and ran into the dark, disappearing down the alley before the flashing lights arrived. Ethan knelt in the street, holding Daniel close as rain began to pour again, mixing with the blood on his hands. You're going to be fine, he said, his voice breaking. You hear me? You're going to be fine. Daniel smiled faintly, his hand gripping Ethan's. You did good, Ethan, he whispered. You chose right. His eyes fluttered shut as the sirens drew closer. The next hours blurred together. Paramedics, flashing lights, the smell of antiseptic and metal. Daniel was rushed to the hospital, Ethan following in a daze. He sat in the waiting room, soaked and shaking, staring at the white floor tiles as if they could give him answers. Detective Miller arrived minutes later, breathless and serious. What happened? He demanded. Ethan's voice cracked as he explained, every word stabbing like glass. Miller placed a hand on his shoulder. We'll find him. I promise. Hours passed before a doctor finally appeared. Ethan jumped to his feet. Is he okay? The doctor sighed, exhausted. He lost a lot of blood, but he's alive. We stopped the bleeding. He'll need time, but he'll recover. Ethan felt his knees go weak with relief. Tears blurred his vision as he whispered, "Thank you." When he was finally allowed into the room, Daniel was pale, connected to wires and machines, but breathing steadily. Ethan sat beside him, holding his hand. "I thought I lost you," he whispered. Daniel's eyes fluttered open, faint but smiling. "You didn't. I told you, we'd face it together." Ethan let out a shaky laugh, tears rolling down his cheeks. "You always keep your promises, don't you?" For the next few days, Ethan barely left Daniel's side. The police searched for Travis but found no trace. Still, Ethan wasn't afraid anymore. Something inside him had changed. He realized Daniel had taken the bullet meant for him, and that sacrifice couldn't be wasted. He had to be better. He would be better. One evening, while Daniel slept, Ethan walked out onto the hospital balcony. The city stretched before him, bright lights, distant sirens, life moving on. He thought about who he had been, and who his brother believed he could be. For the first time, he didn't feel like a criminal pretending to be good. He felt like a man who had finally found his way back. Down the hall, Detective Miller watched him quietly. "He's not the same guy anymore," Miller murmured to a nurse. "No," she said softly. "He's not." But far away, in a rundown motel outside the city, Travis sat in the dark, nursing a wounded arm and burning with anger. He looked at his reflection in the cracked mirror, hatred twisting his face. "You think it's over, Carter?" he hissed. "It's not over." He loaded his gun again, eyes cold. "Not until one of us is gone." The storm outside began to rise again, thunder echoing in the distance. The story wasn't finished yet, and the final reckoning was coming. Days turned into weeks, and Daniel slowly began to recover. The color returned to his face, and the doctors said he was lucky the bullet had missed his heart by an inch. Ethan spent every day at the hospital, helping him eat, talking to him, reading the Bible aloud the way Daniel used to do for him. The brothers laughed again, softly, like old times. But deep down, Ethan couldn't shake one thought: Travis was still out there. Every time he looked out a window or heard a car stop nearby, his chest tightened. He knew Travis wouldn't let this go. Men like him didn't forget humiliation. They didn't forgive. One rainy afternoon, while Daniel was resting, Ethan stepped out for air. He stood in the hospital parking lot, watching the gray clouds roll in. A chill ran down his spine. Something felt off. Then he saw it, a black car parked near the exit, engine running. His heart dropped. Before he could move, a familiar voice echoed through the rain. "You thought you could hide forever?" Travis stepped out of the car, gun in hand, his face pale and twisted with rage. "You ruined me, Carter. You made me bleed. Now it's your turn." Ethan froze. "Travis, listen to me," he said, his hands raised. "You don't have to do this. It's over." Travis shook his head, laughing bitterly. "Over? You took everything from me. My crew, my money, my name. You think you get to walk free while I rot?" Inside the hospital, Daniel opened his eyes. Something in his chest told him Ethan was in danger. He pushed himself up despite the pain, his stitches burning, and stumbled toward the hallway. Outside, Ethan tried to reason with the man he once feared. "Travis, I know what I did. I know I hurt people. But I'm not that man anymore. You can still start over too." Travis's eyes burned. "Start over? You think I want your pity?" He aimed the gun straight at Ethan's chest. "Say goodbye, preacher boy." The shot never came. A voice shouted from behind, "Drop the gun, Travis." It was Detective Miller, gun drawn, emerging from behind a car. Travis spun around, cursing. Ethan used the moment to dive forward, grabbing Travis's arm. The gun went off again, the bullet grazing Ethan's shoulder, but he didn't stop. He wrestled with Travis, both men crashing to the wet ground. The gun slid away, spinning under a car. Travis snarled, punching wildly. "You think you're better than me now?" he shouted. Ethan held on, breathing hard. "No," he gasped. "Just trying to be better than I was." With one final push, he pinned Travis down as Miller ran forward, handcuffing him quickly. Travis struggled, furious. "You'll regret this, Carter. You'll regret every..." Miller yanked him to his feet. "Save it for the judge." As Travis was dragged away, Ethan sat back on the cold pavement, rain washing the blood from his shoulder. He looked up at the gray sky, breathing deeply. For the first time, the storm felt clean. Daniel came running out, hospital gown flapping, clutching his side. "Ethan," he cried. Ethan turned, weak but smiling. It's okay. It's over. Daniel knelt beside him, tears mixing with the rain. You're bleeding. Ethan chuckled softly. Guess it's a family thing. Miller approached, resting a hand on Ethan's shoulder. You did good, son. You faced him, and you didn't run. Ethan nodded, voice barely a whisper. I was tired of running. Weeks later, Travis was sentenced to prison. The news spread quickly how the man who once terrorized the streets had finally fallen. Ethan and Daniel watched the report together from home. Daniel's arm was in a sling, Ethan's shoulder was still bandaged. The reporter called Ethan a hero. He didn't feel like one, but for the first time, he didn't feel like a criminal either. That evening, as the sun set, the brothers stood outside the shelter. People waved, smiling, welcoming them back. Ethan helped serve dinner again, greeting everyone with warmth and humility. A little boy tugged on his sleeve and asked, Mister, are you really the man who stopped the bad guy? Ethan smiled softly. No, kid. I'm just a man who finally stopped being one. Daniel laughed quietly beside him. The two brothers exchanged a look, one filled with gratitude, pain, and pride. They had survived the worst, and somehow, they were still standing. Later that night, when the shelter lights dimmed, Ethan stepped outside, looking up at the stars. The city was calm. For the first time in years, so was he. He whispered into the quiet air, "Thank you, for a second chance." Behind him, Daniel's voice came gently, "You earned it." The two stood there, side by side, as the night wind carried away the last trace of their old lives. The story that began with an arrest had ended with redemption. And though scars remained, both brothers finally understood something powerful. Sometimes, it takes losing everything to truly find yourself.